David Kirp is a professor of public policy at the Goldman School of Public Policy in Berkeley, University of California in Berkeley. He's the author of 15 books, many articles. He's also produced a lot of journalism that has had wide impact and readership. He's been involved in government agencies and foundations and directly in community work along with his academic work. He is a high-impact thinker who was here several years ago as our Sachs lecturer in an earlier book of his. I think this was in 2007. And we had a wonderful exchange with him about his book, The Sandbox Investment, which is about investing in preschool. And this was sort of on the eve of moving into the Obama administration, where he served on the transition team. Today we're going to be hearing about his new book. And I'm not going to say anything more about it because you're going to hear about it from David and from Susan Furman. I'm going to ask them to come up and sit here and engage in conversation, and he will make his presentation through that conversation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm delighted to engage in this conversation with David, who I have known more years than 99% of you were alive. I got my degree from TC, my PhD, but I started at Berkeley. And that's where I first met David. So great to see you again.
It's great to be back.
And we're just going to start by talking about this wonderful book, which I really enjoyed, and just asking you to summarize the main themes and message to get us started.
Well, let me just provide a little background about Union City. And let me know if the echo is going to drive folks crazy. I first came upon Union City when I was working on a book after the Obama administration stint on 5 big ideas for supporting kids. And one of them, no great surprise, one of them was early education. And I went to Union City because it had a great reputation for the early education program that it has. And I loved it. And while I was there, I knew that their test scores through the 8th grade were good, and I wanted to see what was going on. So I just wandered around the school I was in and bopped into classrooms, and nobody sort of directed me where to go, and I saw some competent teaching, a lot of very good teaching, and some superlative teaching. And what I didn't see were those mythical lazy bums sitting there reading the newspaper, showing films. I saw lots of, it's the right place to talk about this, lots of constructivist education going on, lots of hands-on problem solving. And I was curious to know why. And I was particularly curious to know what was going on in Union City. Now, how many of you, raise your hands, how many of you have been to Union City? It's a great place, I will say that. And I was startled. I had spent some time earlier in Camden. I won't ask for the same show of hands. Camden is kind of a scary town. No grocery store, 27 bars. And I feared when I heard how poor and crowded Union City was that I was going to be getting Camden too. It's nothing like that. It's a very vibrant Latino community. I live not far from the Mission District in San Francisco. That's what it feels like. Lots of folks from all across Latin America, from Mexico to Chile, and a lot of folks from DR there. And once upon a time, it was indeed such a point of influx for Cubans that it was known as Havana on the Hudson. Second biggest concentration in the US. Most of the Cubans following the classic American success story moved out, live in the suburbs, but they still have a number of businesses there. And lots of the teachers came over as kids in the freedom flights back in the 1960s. So it's a very unlikely place to find fabulous education going on. And the more I stayed there, the more impressed I was. So here are the headlines. Here's why you want to pay attention to Union City, and then I'll go back and fill in sort of the kind of guts of the story. Through all the years of high-stakes testing, and as you know, for better and worse, that's the coin of the realm out there in the universe. These kids are doing testing at levels that approximate the state of New Jersey average. New Jersey is a very suburban state, so that's pretty impressive. But I'm much more impressed by the fact that their graduation rate, and remember, this is poor Latino kids, 75% of them coming from homes where Spanish is the language at the dinner table, and it's the telenovela, not the reality show that's on the TV. And they've got about a 90% federally subsidized lunch rate. Probably would be higher except for the fact that kids from undocumented families, the families are nervous about showing their heads. Maybe a quarter of the families, it's estimated, are undocumented. In that community, the graduation rate is 90%. National average, about 75%. New York average, 62, 63%. Latino average in New York in the below 50% area, just to give you a sense of what the differences look like. And I spent a year there, and while I was there, I was fortunate enough to be housed across the way in the center run by the social work school and spent a lot of time here, and it's great to see Jeff Hennig here. He was a great, person to bounce ideas off of during the time that I was here. And what I came away with in a year where I could do anything I wanted, where I spent a lot of time in a third grade classroom of new immigrant kids who were about to take the first high-stakes exam of their lives as they were learning English, and at a school in a kind of tough neighborhood in a tough town, and in other schools and with the administration and in that community and understanding this astonishing political system that holds this place together. What I came away with was the fact that the story of how this place succeeded is one that any educator with a pulse will know about. You don't have to go to teachers' college to get the guts of what these folks are doing. If you describe the essence of what's happening there, anybody would agree. So you start with really strong early education. They have 2 years full-day early education thanks to a state court ruling that funds that. And they've figured out how to do it. Because so many of the kids come to school not speaking English, the bilingual program begins with kids getting a solid grounding in Spanish, in reading and writing, as well as vocabulary, because you build up that strong base in your native language and transition to English, and the hope is that they'll hold on to both languages. There are regular assessments of these kids, but those assessments are not used to beat up on teachers. They're used to pinpoint the places where teachers and students need help, and that help comes in the form of other teachers collaborating with them, both in group gatherings and coming to their classes and co-teaching with them and bringing in coaches to work there. There's much less sending people out to conferences, what are sometimes called spray and pray meetings, much more in the school focused. And through all of that, there's a very strong climate of mutual support and mutual trust. And that extends to the relationships between the community and the school system, the political system and the school system. There's a very, very tight set of connections. And I suspect we'll talk more about trust, but all I want to say now about any of this is it's really easy to rattle off those things. And someplace in the book there apparently are 7, I hadn't counted them, 7 big ideas. And so this gets described as the 7 big ideas book, but it's not really. It's one idea. It's do the work, do the stuff you know how to do. Begin with 3- and 4-year-olds, carry it on through high school. Hold on to those students, set high expectations for them. Run a system that's based on trust and high expectations and enthusiasm, not fear and under the gun and intimidation. It's not a secret. New York Times headlined the piece that I wrote called "The Secret of Successful Schools," and I suppose it drew in readers, but the secret is there's no secret. And it's none of the faddish stuff that passes for the secret these days.
So you're essentially saying stick to the knitting, steady work. How do you do that in a time of such silver bullet-driven reform? Accountability mandates come down and change, teacher evaluation changes everything, and these waves sweep in regularly. So how do you withstand all that?
Well, after I finished the work in Union City, I thought people would say, this is a very special place. It's got a lot of money, it's not so big, it's a town of about 85,000, it's got 15 schools. That, by the way, is pretty typical of where most kids in this country are educated. It's got an appointed school board, it's got a strong, powerful mayor who's also, in New Jersey, you can be a state senator as well as a mayor. And he's a Democrat who's made himself Governor Christie's best friend, which means he has brought in the bacon. Lots of great schools. If you go visit the high school there, you will be, I don't care where you've been, you'll be blown away. Imagine a school where the football field is carved out of the inside of the school. You really feel like you're in Friday Night Lights when you're out there in that place. So I went looking for other school districts around the country. Big, little, union, non-union, contentious union, school board elected, school board appointed, well-funded, not well-funded. And I looked at all the various sources that I could find and did some site visits and relied a lot on other people's work. And what I found was that the guts of what Union City is doing is the guts of what those places are doing. If you're poor, you got to triage. You can't have 2 years of full day pre-K. You might be able to have a half day of pre-K for 4-year-olds for the neediest kids, and that's not something that a district wants to do. You're going to concentrate on getting kids through high school. You're going to stint on advanced placement classes. If you're in different parts of the country, you're going to emphasize different aspects of the culture. But the guts of this, a few well-demonstrated, well-proven, evidence-based ideas baked into a system which you persist in improving, tweaking at the margin. There's a very famous preschool curriculum called High Scope. And High Scope boils down to plan, do, review. Works really well for, and I've seen it, works really well for 3- and 4-year-olds. It also works for school systems. You know, in management, the language is continuous improvement. As I say, there's nothing new about this. You know, but it's so easy to say these things. It's so hard to make them happen. And I think Union City has been very good at walking that fine line between satisfying what you've got to satisfy to make the state happy and Washington happy, and providing the kind of education they'd like to provide. So, you know, there are big compromises that are made. There's a chapter in the book in which I talk about, I spent a lot of time in this one elementary school, and there's a chapter in the book near the end in which I talk about what happens in the winter and spring as they're leading up to test-taking time, like right now, and I was just over there a couple of days ago. And the chapter is called Where Fun Comes to Die and Be Reborn. And the reborn is, you know, after the test time, then the teachers can go back to doing all the stuff that they wanted to do all along. So that's the compromise. As February moves into March, you know, into April, it's just very drill-focused. And that, you know, it takes its toll. I think it probably there has discouraged people who liked writing from writing because they're so formulaic. There are more kids who like math these days because I guess you can always do interesting problems in math. But that balancing act, how as a teacher, in the classroom, you figure out how much do you do this kind of get the test scores up, and how much do you do the fun, exciting, interesting stuff to make sure that students, you know, aren't falling asleep or aren't being turned off. It's a very tricky balance, and it's not the happiest balance that anybody would want. But it's what they pull off, and it's what every place else that I know, you know, pulls off. I look at, you know, Montgomery County, rich, big, 15th largest school district in the country, part of it really wealthy and really well educated, part of it very poor. You know, what did they do? They actually concentrated this very interesting program on the poor neighborhoods. And they managed they've continued to manage to raise achievement levels, close the gap, you know, increase the number of AP classes and algebra in 8th grade across the system. And then I think about Aldine, Texas. Now, I I'd be willing to give a small prize to anybody in the room who's ever heard of Aldine, Texas. I think I'm going to be safe. So if I told you that Aldine was bigger than Washington, D.C. in terms of number of students, bigger than Boston, it's Houston's poor cousin. It's poor black and Latino, a handful of white kids, with an $8,000 a year budget to spend, not an $18,000 a year budget, which is what New York has to spend. And it's the same story, the stripped-down version of the Union City story. Very solid, very much plan, do, review. And like Union City 25 years ago, it was so bad, that the state was about to take it over. It was next to the bottom. You know, they would say in Union City, thank God for Camden, which, as you may have noted, has just been taken over by the state of New Jersey. And they didn't change overnight. I mean, this is where the patience part of the story comes in. You know, little by little, year by year, built on, you know, some basic precepts about how do you teach kids who speak Spanish, and how do you teach kids who come from homes where there aren't a lot of books around to become engaged in learning and fluent in Spanish and then in English, while satisfying, you know, the increasing demands of the folks outside. It's a very exquisite dance.
And you're suggesting that the political stability and the protection enables that. But that's really interesting with respect to Union City because it's known as being part of the Hudson County machine. I mean, I did research there in the 70s where I was actually physically afraid because I was asking questions about how contracts were awarded to busing companies and to cafeteria workers. And those were not questions that you should ask in Union City.
Right.
And so you have still a patronage-driven system. Mm-hmm. Yet the machine is protecting the schools and not interfering. I think there was one case where you said there was a deputy principal that was put in by the mayor, but generally it wasn't interfering. Is that?
No, I think that, you know, as I see it, and the treaty, in effect, looks like this. The cafeteria workers, the security guards, the crossing guards, those folks are folks who've worked with for the mayor during campaigns. They've been involved in that stuff. Mm-hmm. But the teachers on up, you know, they're new. So the high school is new. It's an exciting place. It's the last part of the system to change. Brought on a whole new team of assistant principals. None of them have any political connections whatsoever. Just straight educator types. And by the way, if you think that there's a system in the country where politics doesn't play a role, folks, you know, it's not so. But politics may look different from place to place. It's very important in Union City now that they've got a strong mayor, strong senator, strong backer of education, and you've got this virtuous circle that exists, right? You know, you trust the school system, they do better, you trust them more, this reflects well on you, so you've got a mayor, senator who can claim bragging rights for the school system that he has. But I certainly would not suggest that mayoral control is a panacea for anything, because one mayor, one city, you know, you get one kind of school system. If, when Brian Stack, the mayor, leaves, and he has this notion of being mayor for life, but I'll tell you, given how hard he works, that life may not be as long as he would like it to be. Who knows who's going to come in again? But there it works. And I was looking at places that had mayorally appointed boards and places that had electoral boards. The key in that area, the key is stability.
Yeah.
You gotta trust the school system to do something, because as you know, I mean, the classic churn is school board picks a superintendent, the superintendent promises miracles, the miracles don't happen fast enough, a bunch of insurgents run for the school board, you know, on the let's get those bums out of there, they win, the superintendent's gone, another superintendent shows up. 3 years, less than 3 years is the tenure of the average big city school superintendent. I know this, that everything that I just described would be almost impossible to maintain because the new superintendent is almost bound and determined to throw out what the predecessor did. And if you're on the ground, if you're a principal or a teacher and you live in that kind of a system, you're really, I mean, the best thing you can do is just wait them out because you know they're going to be gone and something else is going to happen. And that's not a recipe for anything in the world.
sticking with politics for a moment, unions don't figure very highly, or prominently in your story. They're in the background.
They are. Well, I think, to put it, how am I going to put it? The system has enough money to pay people well, and they're brought into the process. And they're not a work-to-rule kind of union. There's a moment that I describe in the book where the preschool teachers, preschool is fabulous as a teaching. I have a very good preschool. The best preschool teachers are the best teachers, period, full stop. And, a lot of kindergarten teachers, sort of infected by No Child Left Behind, start thinking about kindergarten as the new first grade, where kids are sitting in rows and they're going to be, kind of call and response teaching. And the kids who'd been to these great project-based, wonderfully rich environment preschools wouldn't stand for this. And the kindergarten teachers are really unhappy that basically the preschool was fomenting revolution among, 4-year-olds. What the system decided to do is to take the master teachers from the preschool and redesign the kindergartens. And there were some kindergarten teachers that said, "What is this?" And they complained to the union. And the union said, "Forget it. This is the way, this is indeed what that world is going to look like." And now you go into kindergarten classes and they do look like preschool classes for kids who are slightly older. And indeed, if you work your way up the ladder, kids working in groups, not in one place all the time, lots of projects, lots of things supplementing textbooks, lots of cross-disciplinary stuff, all those things which are first nature for the preschool teacher really work their way up the ladder. And you see some of it in really interesting ways in high school classes as well.
Great. So throughout your remarks, money has come up. Even though some of these other districts that you cite don't have the funds that Union City has, doing the excellent preschool, buying off the teachers through their contracts, all that takes money. So clearly this is not the money down the drain vision of New Jersey school district spending. This is money well spent.
Right. Two things to be said about money. One of them that you're suggesting is that it's really easy to waste a lot of money. See Camden, see Trenton as two very good examples. And the other thing is, you can do, if you don't have much money, you can still do really good, solid work. See Long Beach, California, Aldine, Texas, little farm town called Sanger, just outside of Fresno, which is even poorer than Union City. The difference is that Union City can do those things that really make for a great school system, not a great urban school system or a great school system for poor kids, a great school system. I don't know how many of you went to schools where there were 3 years of Mandarin offered in the curriculum. So imagine you're going to graduate a bunch of kids from high school who are trilingual, Mandarin, English, Espanol. That's pretty amazing. That's the stuff you can do. The art program, fabulous. The science labs, my guess is that Columbia, if those labs are all antiquated, would be really happy to swap labs. And certainly the music department, the theater. This is professional level stuff. And it makes a difference, right? If you've got science equipment that you can really do great things with, you're going to turn kids on who might at the margin not be turned on. And that's wonderful. It's not icing on the cake. It says that if you really want to bring a generation of kids fully into, the education mainstream and the American mainstream, you need that. You're talking about $17,000 a year. And, I won't bore you with the traditional, what is it going to cost to send a kid to juvie or to jail? You know that. How much more those kids, 90% graduation rate, those kids are going to make, the economists will tell us, to graduate from high school is worth $250,000 over your life. Do the math, $17,000, that's $7,000 or $8,000 a year more for 10 years, $250,000. Somebody offered me that return on an investment, I sure would take it.
Right. So, going back to our roots, which was at the beginning of the school finance reform movement, the Abbott case in New Jersey has really paid off here. both in the money and in the preschool mandate.
Right.
Yeah,
So the Abbott case is really interesting
yeah.
because the court, it's one of the classic kinds of cases, and those of you who know the desegregation cases will see some parallels. The court in the desegregation cases would say initially, here's some parameters within which you need to operate school district. And the school district would screw it up deliberately. And the court would say, no, that's not the way to do it. You've got to do a little bit more specific. And the school district would continue to fuss around. My favorite story was when the Cleveland schools were setting the thermostat at 90 degrees. You had to have heat in the winter, which they didn't have. So, okay, they had 90-degree heat. That's what they were doing. So you actually had to have an order which said, no, 70, 68, whatever, not 90 degrees. But more and more and more. And the same thing happened in Abbott.
Yeah.
Abbott was a very general, it said, these kids to get the kind of equal opportunity they need more. They need something more. And you guys figure out, you lawmakers, figure out what that something more means. And the legislators stalled, balked, resisted. And I don't know, the last count, there were 17 or 18 Abbott decisions, each time round, with the court saying, we really want to be out of here. I don't know how many of you have read Dickens, but this is like Jarndyce versus Jarndyce. You're born with this case, you die with this case. The next generation is going to sort of be living with this case. But the big turning point moment was when the court decided that it wasn't just going to fuss with money. It was going to dig around in the education issues. Now this once upon a time I was a lawyer, and then I went straight, but still. For courts to dig around in that terrain is dicey business and not the way you'd like the world ideally to operate. But in this instance, they were guided by some very smart people, National Institute for Early Education Research at Rutgers, and developed standards for preschool, very specific standards having to do with, among other things, the kind of education that the folks needed and to be training in preschool. And the court also essentially mandated, we're going to support that we're going to take the people who are working in preschools now, private, for-profit, not-profit, church-run preschools, which many of them in the state, they weren't preschools, they were babysitting places. The kind of abuelas were there sort of taking care of the kids. You got to have somebody with a college degree and child development training, and the colleges rose to the occasion. They sent teachers, professors to the schools to work nights, weekends with those teachers. And again, in the places that knew how to take advantage of Abbott, like Union City, 35 preschools. About a third of the kids go to public preschools. And so the best of those, so this Hustis preschool, that's a national model. You'd be totally happy to have your kids or a child that you love in that school. But the real story is how they built a system, how they brought up those other schools, and they keep bringing up those other schools with lots of hands-on help from the experts. There's still, I'm afraid, a lot of people in superintendents who think, school board members who think, oh, that's still just babysitting. We're not going to worry about that stuff. Anything can happen there. Somehow, they aren't paying attention to the research, and they aren't paying attention to their own kids. If you watch, there's this image of the child as, the empty vessel into which knowledge is poured. Well, I don't know. You all know little kids, and if you were going to come up with a metaphor to describe them, I don't think empty vessel would be high on your list. So, they're really a little explorers. They're kind of little Lewis and Clarks, right? And you give them some guidance and some help and some support along the way, and they're going to do fabulously. And that's what Union City has figured out and is continuing to figure out how to do, because as I said, it never stops. That's the other part of the story. There's never that sort of, mission accomplished kind of thing going on here. It's steady work. I did a piece, it'll be appearing in a magazine called School Administrator, which goes to superintendents around the place. And I hope they keep the title that I gave it when I gave it to them. It's called Tortoise Beats Hare. And that's another way of describing the message of this.
Yeah. So you know that TC is celebrating its 125th anniversary.
You'll notice that I'm celebrating along with you here.
Absolutely. And a very old TC idea is the notion that we have to attend to the whole child in the community to get success in the classroom, you know, dealing with health issues that influence achievement and dysfunction and violence and all those other things. Here you have a very poor community, and the only intervention I've heard you talk about is preschool, which is enormously important, but how do the effects of poverty get alleviated so they're not negatively influencing what goes on in the schools?
Right. It's a very important part of the story, the engagement of parents and community groups. And you know, you go back to TC being founded at the time that Jane Addams is running Hull House and the settlement houses. You know, the preschools that ran during World War II in the Kaiser shipyards in Oregon, we could really do well just to bring those back. Same curriculum, same everything. They actually were staffed by TC, you know, alums and professors. Yeah. And here you could just bring back Hull House and the Hull House philosophy. Well, as you may know, getting parents, poor parents engaged in their kids' lives and in the lives of the kids' education, and particularly in the lives of the school, is really hard to do. So I'm hanging out in Washington School, poor school in a poor community. And it's a month after the year has begun, and it's parents' night. And it's pouring rain. Kind of rain, the umbrella is useless. Nobody is going to show up. And the auditorium was packed. At a guess, 90% of the kids had a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a friend. Somebody was there for that kid. And that didn't just happen. You go back 25 years, the school district wasn't putting out any material in Spanish. And parents were getting getting the idea. And so if they got a little money, they'd send their kids to the parochial schools, because there they would get at least a decent education. But what they've done since then is to develop a community liaison relationship with real people who work in that community, who are known to the community, so that, you know, if Maria or Billy isn't in school, you know, Maria Kanik at Washington School will pick up the phone and say, "What happened to Billy? Is he okay?" Or if he was late, you know this is a... And if, you know, mom or dad comes in and says, you know, we can't afford a school uniform, or we're having trouble, can you get us on the list for public housing? Or, you know, we're trying to work to get a green card. But this is the stuff that she knows. She's got the Rolodex in her head. So there's all that kind of reaching out. It's not, you know, and when the parents, and I would sit with the parents during, you know, the second part of Parents' Night, when, you know, the parents troop into the room and there's the teacher and they're having this conversation. I love my teacher, Alina Basbali, who's a big character in the book, and she describes herself as dulce y duro, sweet and tough, which is exactly what she was. But she's saying to these parents, you know, a lot of times parents think, it's really great that we have good schools because we can now leave the education business to you. Absolutely not. You can really make a difference in your kids' education. You can make sure that their homework gets done. You can take them to the store with you and explain why you're buying, you know, these tamales and not those, you know, why you're, you know, whatever it is that you're doing. You can show them, you know, bills that you're paying, or if you're opening up putting money in a piggy bank, you can talk about that. And for these parents, this is a town where the people are not only poor, but because so many of them, they're new immigrants and they often will come with 2, 3, 4 years of education. And this is the first time anybody has told them that they have something of value to contribute to their kids' education. And it's really emotion rending to watch the faces of people when they realize that they're valued in this story. And, you know, while I'm there, let me just say a word about what happens with kids from other parts of the world, because that's really an important part of this tale, and it's a very important part of the story in New York as well. So if a child shows up at age 3 or 4, it's relatively easy for that child to merge into the general population. And by 2nd or 3rd grade, you know, there they are, and you wouldn't know who was who. But if a kid comes at age 14, 15, 16, from, let's say, the DR, and all of the transcript says they've been to school for 8 years, that transcript was bought by an official who was happy to be bribed to produce a transcript. The kid probably went to school 2 or 3 years, sat in the dirt floor, 60 kids in the class, sharing whatever books there were with a not very well-educated teacher. They come, at age 14, 15, not being able to spell their own name, not recognizing numbers sometimes. And somehow, you got to get those kids, at 4 years, to get those kids to a diploma. So, it is no easy task for teachers in the 9th grade here to deal with kids who they say, I've got a 5th and 6th grade education. But of these classes, these port of entry classes, the teachers, they would trade up for a 4th or 6th grade education any time. And they have developed a program which starts out again, heavy concentration in Spanish, ESL at the same time, subjects in Spanish, gradually moving into English, so that if the process works, by the time they're seniors, they're in the regular English class. They're reading the same novels that other kids are going to be reading. This June, among the top 10 students in the graduating class of, 620, 2 of the top 10 students came to the US 4 years ago not speaking a word of English. And it's not as though they said, sit in that room and study. When I talked to those kids, they rattled off the organizations that they were not just members of, but officers in. And kids in the future business people of America don't know about political correctness and how cool it would be to have an immigrant kid as president of this organization. They know that here's a kid who's the best we got. So that's also part of the story, and that's something that the community appreciates as well and gets as well.
So my final question, and then we'll turn to the audience, is how could state and federal policymakers encourage more of this kind of education and success?
It's interesting. The variant of that question that I got, I was giving a talk at Union City High School, which was really like the band's playing and a kid who could have come from the set of Glee sings the Star Spangled Banner. This will be on C-SPAN's book talk, unlike anything else that very stage show has ever done, and it's going to be a whole lot of fun to watch. And I got that question. A version of that question was, so do you think that these ideas can have any influence at the... And then I thought, if they say Washington, we talked about Washington in a second, in school districts, and I said, that's the right question. For me, that's the right question, because that's a level in which you actually can act in significant ways, and people are hungry to act. Look, when I was in Union City, hanging out in the schools, I learned about a phenomenon that I did not know existed. Teachers who hate kids. What are they doing there? Teachers who hate kids. And the best guess from people, like 1 in 10 of those teachers. And I'm guessing that's probably true in many places. And that shouldn't be. Those teachers should be counseled to go do something else, like be undertakers or whatever. Something else. But 90% of the folks are absolutely with it. And the measure of that is when that article in the New York Times came out, the school district was flooded with phone calls from school folks who wanted to see what was going on and what they could learn. So when I think about Washington, and I think about the fact that they haven't learned what used to be in our kindergarten days called works and plays well together.
Right.
Wait your turn, share, use your words, all that stuff. You sort of go back to Celia Rojas's class in preschool and try to get it right this time. So lost cause is the wrong way of putting it. And as I mentioned to you, I'm going to be talking to those folks next week. I do not hold out high hopes. So all sorts of forces and pressures pushing the other way in Washington. And the only thing I can say about Washington is this. We all, and I've got my historian here so you can check me at the gate, we tend to think about the future as being like the present, only sort of more so in some way. And I come from a place where incrementalism is the norm. And I think of what you wind up with is something that looks much more like punctuated equilibrium. It's a notion from evolution, where you'll go along for a while, and you'll sort of, things will happen, they'll perk along. Then a big change. There'll be a big change. And the example that I use to give myself and others heart about this is the following. Think all the way back, rack your memories to January 2012, all the way back. And imagine if some professor sitting here said to you, a merchant in Tunis is going to be so fed up with the corruption that he's living with that he's going to set himself on fire, the Tunisian government is going to fall, and all the Arab states are going to be in turmoil. I mean, you would have thought that I was, a comedian on the, the Stephen Colbert show, right? But that's what happened. Many academics made their lives as Sovietologists. They had to find a new career, right, when the Iron Curtain fell. So we go through, I don't think we are forever in the embrace of this process. But if I were advising folks where to put your money,
You spoke yesterday and today, and my list is only down to about 3 or 4.
So if you pick the one.
Yeah, okay.
Pick the one. Yeah. The one, because I have lots of sympathy with it. You're trying to do in Washington Heights. I remember this from our conversation. What Union City has done. So
that is correct, and I'll try and tie these questions together, which follow on what the last speaker asked about in terms of college readiness, pertaining to where do these students go to college? Do they go to Hudson Community College? Do they go to Jersey City State? Are they college ready? Because you spoke about remediation in New York City, 75% of the graduates end up in remedial studies at the lowest level of community colleges. And I'm particularly interested in knowing, and if there has been success there, how has that been reflective of increased funding over the last 25 years through the Abbott decision? Could you quantify that? And how is that impacted by class size reduction? In my district, we have third grade classes of more than 32 students. So these are the issues which I would use as a comparison with what happens in Washington Heights.
So money, class size, graduation. I've just worked that way around. New York spends as much per kid as Union City does. I come from California. We spend $8,000 for a student. I mean, this is madness. If people came, it would be like folks coming from the third world to visit, Mecca if they showed up in Union City. There's a lot of money sloshing around this system. I have no idea where it goes. I'm not a New York guy. The classes are small. Sort of an average, the ratio is 20-something to 1, and I think that's, you get classes, where there's intense learning. Those kids who are learning English, they're in third grade. There were 18 kids in that class. As for what happens after they get out of high school, I don't have anything more to add to what I just said. I think they're just collecting the data now, interestingly. They haven't followed those kids. But my prediction, a lot of them go to the community college and to, whatever it is, North Jersey State, The top kids, and there's an amazing 75-year-old Egyptian emigre, and she gets these kids winning gold medals in science and working in the labs in Stevens Institute during the summers. And they go to Princeton and Yale and MIT and the joint medical program at Brown. But that's a handful of kids. And I think the social science teachers are beginning to say, why can't we be doing this with our high-flying kids? But this is a matter, it's not just, it's a matter of the expectations that the teachers have had in the high school for a long time. Kind of good enough. And you're shifting a culture, trying to shift a culture from good enough to good. When you say, we're going to have every kid take the PSAT, then you are saying something about college ready. So my hunch is that if, when we see the data for now, we're going to be disappointed, but not surprised. Because those kids that have skated through are really not college ready. But I'd rather have a 90% graduation rate in problems than a 60-some% graduation rate and a 50% or 40% Latino African American graduation rate in problems. This is, again, 40 years in the desert. We still got a bunch of years to go. But they, it's the point, I called them out on this when I was talking at Union City High School the other night, and I went up to Benetti, the principal, and said, "What'd you think about that?" And he said, thank you so much for doing that. You basically took my speech and made it your speech. So it's kind of like reinforcing what it is that he's doing. And they get the message. The teachers get the message. They really are moving down that road. And the interest, So now, you go to that school, and in part of the lobby, there's the Athletic Hall of Fame. And this school was built on the site of a great football WPA stadium, Roosevelt Stadium, 60,000 stands, and you've got these life-size cardboard cutouts of the athletic heroes that are around. And then, right next to it, more space taken up by the Academic Hall of Fame. All these students who are doing fabulously well, depicted in exactly the same way as the athletes. Now, if you go down the corridor, on every door, every teacher's door, there is Mary Smith, BA, Iona University, MA, wherever. So it's a way of saying, these people, they've worked for a degree, they're successful folks, they're like you. And many of the folks, the stories of the growing up and making in Union City are fabulous stories, and I tell some of them in the book. But they're moving down their road. Changing the culture from good enough to good is essential, but it's going to take, so I said, come back in 5-7 years, I'm going to be talking about a good high school, great high school, not a great urban high school.
So a student, yes?
Yes, I'm a student. So is this really a story of leadership? Because, you can have great teaching and things like that, but when you're talking about changing culture, culture doesn't change on its own. And so was it from the mayor on down and then appointing, the good local people? So how do you replicate this if it's all about leadership? Because that's, very idiosyncratic.
Well, there are, as I said, there are no supermen or superwomen in this story. And when I looked, that's the reason why when I was done writing about Union City, I thought, let's look at the things that people are going to say. It's only about this. You look at places where the successes are similar and try to look back and see what it is that went on. There are moments when you had a smart guy like Fred Carrig at a desperate time and who has the brains to pick other smart people, and they have the brains to say, we're not going to design the curriculum. We're not going to bring in some fancy bunch of folks from TC to design the curriculum. We're going to have the teachers design the curriculum. So there's buy-in. This is not a top-down system. This is very much this is a system in the sense that it's a woven together enterprise. It starts, another way of thinking about this is the core of it all is skilled teachers engage students in a challenging curriculum. And then everything else around there you design to make that happen, to support that happening. Another way of saying it is that, it's for the kids. And I think they have been pretty good at getting adults to stop playing adult games, which is what goes on too often, and to actually, because they're locals, paradoxically, it means they're their kids. As I say, sometimes in the literal sense, but these folks have never gone anyplace. Look, the stakes now are so high in this debate, right, between the market folks who believe that if you close schools and fire teachers and open charters and hand out vouchers. I don't know if you saw today's paper, Times, about the spread of vouchers. They believe, and none of it has anything to do with education. You never hear anybody talking about education. It's all structured in politics. There was a school board election in Los Angeles early this month. And one of the incumbents had dared to say, we've got to slow down the approval of charter schools because some not very good charter schools are opening up. And we've got to figure out just how much weight we're going to assign to the kids' achievement score improvement in determining promotions and tenure. It wasn't throw out the test evaluator. It wasn't throw out charter schools. This is a thoughtful guy. But raising those questions was enough to get $4 million poured into the campaign to defeat him. $4 million. You could run for governor in South Dakota on $4 million. 1 million of those $4 million came from a guy named Bloomberg. So I think maybe now that he's turned out in New York, he wants to run for mayor in LA. He likes the kind of the role. $750,000 from Rupert Murdoch, $250,000 from my least favorite former superintendent, Michelle Rhee. And, you know, on the other side, what's going to happen? The teachers union chipped in $1 million. You got $1 million versus $4 million. The incumbent won. And by the way, what do the market forces say? They point to another election where an incumbent beat a challenger. And the differences are so slight. That incumbent had several $1 million invested in her campaign. The challengers had like $16,000 to spend. But my hope is that, you know, that little election is this tiny grain of hope that you can't sort of buy the system, that people who are very rich and who think they know everything because they're very rich are going to reshape where it is that we are now and do so in ways that I don't fear, I am sure, would be worse than where we are now. Because if trust is the core of the story, you know, there is no better way to foment distrust than through that kind of adult game.
So we have to end. I know there are more questions, and perhaps David can hang around a little bit and people can come up, but I think that was a wonderful note on which to end. And we're all running out to buy the book, which is now available. Is that
Outside.
right? It's outside. So thank
I'll
you.
hang out out
everybody.
there. So thank you.